Section 2 of a selection from the poetry of Saadi Shirazi, edited by Nathan Haskell Dole and Bell Walker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Gulistan, or Rose Garden, Part 1. Preface. The glorious qualities of the monarch of the true faith. May God make clear its demonstration. Abu Bakr bin Saad bin Zangi. The fair report of Saadi, which is celebrated by the general voice, and the fame of his sayings, which has travelled the whole surface of the earth, and the loved reed, which imparts his discourse, and which they devour like honey, and the manner in which men carry off the scraps of his writing, as though they were gold leaf, are not to be ascribed to the perfection of his own excellence or eloquence, but to this, that the Lord of the earth, the axis of the revolution of time, the successor of Suleiman, the defender of the people of the true faith, the puissant King of kings, the great Atabak Muzaffar ad-Din Abu Bakr bin Sad bin Zangi, God's shadow on earth, O God, approve him and his desires, has regarded him with extreme condescension, and bestowed on him lavish commendation, and evinced a sincere regard for him. Of a verity, from attachment to him, all people, both high and low, have become favourably inclined toward me, since men adopt the sentiments of their kings. Quatrain. Since to my lowliness thou didst with favour turn, my track is clearer than the sun's bright beam, though in thy servant all might every fault discern. When kings approve, e'en vices virtues seem. Verse. 'Twas in the bath, a piece of perfumed clay came from my loved one's hands to mine one day. Art thou then musk or ambergris? I said. That by thy scent my soul is ravished. Not so, it answered. Worthless earth was I, but long I kept the rose's company. Thus near its perfect fragrance to me came, else I'm but earth, the worthless and the same. Story. A king was seated in a vessel with a Persian slave. The slave had never before beheld the sea, nor experienced the inconvenience of a ship. He began to weep and bemoan himself, and a tremor pervaded his frame. In spite of their endeavours to soothe him, he would not be quieted. The comfort of the king was disturbed by him, but they could not devise a remedy. In the ship there was a philosopher, who said, If you command, I will silence him. The king answered, It would be the greatest favour. The philosopher directed them to cast the slave into the sea. He underwent several submersions, and they then took him by the hair and dragged him toward the ship. He clung to the rudder of the vessel with both hands, and they then pulled him on board again. When he had come on board he seated himself in a corner and kept quiet. The king approved, and asked, What was the secret of this expedient? The philosopher replied, At first he had not tasted the agony of drowning, and knew not the value of the safety of a vessel. In the same manner a person who is overtaken by calamity learns to value a state of freedom from ill. Stanza. Sated thou wilt my barley loaf repel. She whom I love ill-favoured seems to thee. To Eden's houris Iraf would seem hell. Hell's inmates ask, they call it heavenly. Couplet. Wide is the space twixt him who clasps his love, and him whose eyes watch for the door to move. Story. In a certain year I was engaged in devotion at the tomb of the prophet Yahya, in the principal mosque of Damascus. It happened that one of the Arabian princes, who was notorious for his injustice, came as a pilgrim thither, performed his prayers, and asked of God what he stood in need of. Couplet. The poor, the rich, alike must here adore. The wealthier they, their need is here the more. He then turned toward me and said, On account of the generous character of dervishes, and the sincerity of their dealings, I ask you to give me the aid of your spirit, for I stand in dread of a powerful enemy. I replied, Show mercy to thy weak subjects. that thou mayst not experience annoyance from a puissant foe. Verse. With the strong arm and giant grasp 'tis wrong to crush the feeble, unresisting throng. Who pities not the fallen, let him fear, lest, if he fall, no friendly hand be near. Who sows ill actions, and of blessing dreams, fosters vain fantasies, and idly schemes. Unstop thy ears, thy people's wants relieve, if not, a day shall come when all their rights receive. Distichs. All Adam's race are members of one frame, since all, at first, from the same essence came. When by hard fortune one limb is oppressed, the other members lose their wonted rest. If thou feel'st not for others' misery, a son of Adam is no name for thee. Story. One of my companions came to me with complaints of his ill fortune, saying, I have but little means of subsistence, and a large family, and I cannot support the burden of poverty. It has frequently entered my head that I would go to another country, in order that, live how I may, no one may know of my welfare or the reverse. Couplet. Full many a starving wight has slept unknown, full many a spirit fled that none bemoan. Again I am in dread of the rejoicing of my enemies, lest they laugh scoffingly at me behind my back, and impute my exertions in behalf of my family to a want of humanity, and say, Stanza. See now, that wretch devoid of shame! For him fair fortune's face will smile not, nor has smiled. Himself he pampers in each selfish whim, and leaves his hardship to his wife and child. And I know something, as you are aware, of the science of accounts. If by your interest a means of subsistence could be afforded me, which might put me at ease, I should not be able to express my gratitude sufficiently to the end of my life. I replied, O my friend, the king's service has two sides to it, hope of a livelihood, and terror for one's life, and it is contrary to the opinion of the wise, through such a hope to expose oneself to such a fear. Stanza. None in the poor man's hut demand tax on his garden or his land. Be thou content with toil and woe, or with thy entrails feed the crow. He replied, These words that thou hast spoken do not apply to my case, nor hast thou returned an answer to my question. Hast thou not heard what they have said, that the hand of every one who chooses to act dishonestly trembles in rendering the account? Couplet. God favours those who follow the right way. From a straight road I ne'er saw mortal stray. And the sages have said, 4 kinds of persons are in deadly fear of 4 others: the brigand of the sultan, and the thief of the watchman, and the adulterer of the informer, and the harlot of the superintendent of police. And what fear have those of the settling whose accounts are clear? Stanza. Wouldst thou confine thy rival's power to harm thee at discharge? Then while thy trust remains, be not too free. None shall thee then alarm. 'Tis the soiled raiment which, to cleanse from stains, is struck on stones, and asks the washer's pains. I answered, Applicable to thy case is the story of that fox which people saw running away in violent trepidation. Some one said to him, What calamity has happened to cause thee so much alarm? He replied, I have heard that they are going to impress the camel. They rejoined, O shatterbrain, what connection has a camel with thee, and what resemblance hast thou to it? He answered, Peace, for if the envious should, to serve their own ends, say, This is a camel, and I should be taken, who would care about my release so as to inquire into my condition? And before the antidote is brought from Iraq, the person who is bitten by the snake may be dead. And in the same way thou possessest merit, and good faith, and piety, and uprightness. But the envious are in ambush, and the accusers are lurking in corners. If they should misrepresent thy fair qualities, and thou shouldst incur the king's displeasure, and fall into disgrace, who would have power, in that situation of affairs, to speak for thee? I look upon it as thy best course to secure the kingdom of contentment, and to abandon the idea of preferment, since the wise have said. Couplet. Upon the sea 'tis true is boundless gain. Wouldst thou be safe, upon the shore remain. When my friend heard these words, he was displeased, and his countenance was overcast, and he began to utter words which bore marks of his vexation, saying, What judgment, and profit, and understanding, and knowledge is this? And the saying of the sages has turned out correct, in that they have said, Those are useful friends who continue so when we are in prison, for at our table all our enemies appear friends. Stanza. Think not thy friend one who in fortune's hour boasts of his friendship and fraternity. Him I call friend who sums up all his power to aid thee in distress and misery. I saw that he was troubled, and that my advice was taken in bad part. I went to the President of Finance, and, in accordance with our former intimacy, I told him the case; in consequence of which he appointed my friend to some trifling office. Some time passed away. They saw the amenity of his disposition, and approved his excellent judgment. His affairs prospered, and he was appointed to a superior post. And, in the same manner, the star of his prosperity continued to ascend, until he reached the summit of his desires, and became a confidential servant of His Majesty the Sultan, and the pointed at by men's fingers, and one in whom the ministers of state placed their confidence. I rejoiced at his secure position, and said. Couplet. Have no doubts because of trouble, nor be thou discomfited, for the water of life's fountain springeth from a gloomy bed. Couplet. Ah, ye brothers of misfortune, be not ye with grief oppressed. Many are the secret virtues which with the All-Bounteous rest. Couplet. Sit not sad because that time a fitful aspect weareth. Patience is most bitter, yet most sweet the fruit it beareth. During this interval I happened to accompany a number of my friends on a journey to Hijaz. When I returned from the pilgrimage to Mecca, he came out 2 stages to meet me. I saw his outward appearance was one of distress, and that he wore the garb of a dervish. I said, What is thy condition? He replied, Just as thou saidst. A party became envious of me, and accused me of disloyal conduct. And the king did not deign to inquire minutely into the explanation of the circumstances. And my former companions, and even my sincere friends, forbore to utter the truth, and forgot their long intimacy. Stanza. When one has fallen from high heaven's decree, the banded world will trample on his head. Then fawn and fold their hands respectfully, when they behold his steps by fortune led. In short, I was subjected to all kinds of tortures, till within this week that the good tidings of the safety of the pilgrims arrived, when they granted me release from grievous durance, with the confiscation of my hereditary estate. I said, At that time thou wouldst not receive my suggestion, that the service of the king is like a sea voyage, at once profitable and fraught with peril, where thou either wilt acquire a treasure, or perish amid the billows. Couplet. Or with both hands the merchant shall one day embrace the gold, or by the waves his lifeless form shall on the strand be rolled. I did not think it right to lacerate his mental wounds further, or to sprinkle them with salt. I confined myself to these 2 couplets, and said. Stanza. Knewest thou not that thou wouldst see the chains upon thy feet, when a deaf ear thou turnest on the counsels of the wise? If the torture of the sting thou canst not with courage meet, place not thy finger in the hole where the sullen scorpion lies. Story. A person had reached perfection in the art of wrestling. He knew 360 precious sleights in this art, and every day he wrestled with a different device. However, his heart was inclined toward the beauty of one of his pupils. He taught him 359 throws, all he knew, save one, the teaching of which he deferred. The youth was perfect in skill and strength, and no one could withstand him, till he at length boasted before the Sultan that he allowed the superiority of his master over him only out of respect to his years, and what was due to him as an instructor, and that but for that he was not inferior in strength, and on a par with him in skill. The king was displeased at his breach of respect, and he commanded them to wrestle. A vast arena was selected. The great nobles and ministers of the king attended. The youth entered like a furious elephant, with a shock that had his adversary been a mountain of iron would have uptorn it from its base. The master perceived that the young man was his superior in strength. He fastened on him with that curious grip which he had kept concealed from him. The youth knew not how to foil it. The preceptor lifted him with both hands from the ground, and raised him above his head, and dashed him on the ground. A shout of applause arose from the multitude. The king commanded them to bestow a robe of honour and reward on the master, and heaped reproaches on the youth, saying, "Thou hast presumed to encounter him who educated thee, and thou hast failed." He replied, "Sire, my master overcame me not by strength or power, but a small point was left in the art of wrestling which he withheld from me, and by this trifle he has to-day gotten the victory over me." The preceptor said, "I reserved it for such a day as this. For the sages have said, Give not thy friend so much power, that if one day he should become a foe, thou mayst not be able to resist him. Hast thou not heard what once was said by one who had suffered wrong from a pupil of his own?" Stanza. On earth there is no gratitude, I trow, or none perhaps to use it now pretend. None learn of me the science of the bow, who make me not their target in the end. Story. A king gave an order to put an innocent person to death. He said, "O king, for the anger which thou feelest against me, seek not thine own injury." The king asked, "How so?" He replied, "I shall suffer this pang but for a moment, and the guilt of it will attach to thee for ever." Quatrain. Circling on, life's years have fled, as flies the breeze of morn. Sadness and mirth, and foul and fair, for aye have passed away. Dream'st thou, tyrant? Thou hast wreaked on me thy rage and scorn? The burden from my neck has passed, on thine must ever stay. The king laughed and said, "In thy life thou never saidst a truer word than this." He then commanded the usual allowance for descendants of the Prophet to be got ready for him. Story. Abdul Qadir Gilani laid his face on the pebbles in the sanctuary of the Kaaba, and said, "O Lord, pardon me, but if I am deserving of punishment, raise me up at the resurrection blind, that I may not be ashamed in the sight of the righteous." Stanza. Humbly in dust I bow each day my face, with wakening memory. O thou, whom I forget not, say, dost thou bethink thee e'er of me? Story. A thief entered the house of a recluse. However much he searched, he found nothing. He turned back sadly and in despair, and was observed by the holy man, who cast the blanket on which he slept in the way of the thief, that he might not be disappointed. Stanza. The men of God's true faith, I've heard, grieve not the hearts e'en of their foes. When will this station be conferred on thee, who dost thy friends oppose? The friendship of the pure-minded, whether in presence or absence, is not such that they will find fault with thee behind thy back, and die for thee in thy presence. Couplet. Before thee, like the lamb they gentle are, absent, than savage wolves more ruthless far. Couplet. They who the faults of others bring to you, be sure they'll bear to others your faults too. Story. Certain travellers had agreed to journey together, and to share their pains and pleasures. I wished to join them. They withheld their consent. I said, "It is inconsistent with the benevolent habits of the eminent to avert the countenance from the society of the lowly, and to decline to be of service to them. And I feel in myself such power of exertion and energy that in the service of men I should be an active friend, not a weight on their minds. Couplet. What though I'm born not in the camel throng, yet will I strive to bear your loads along. One of them said, Let not thy heart be grieved at the answer thou hast received, for within the last few days a thief came in the guise of a dervish and linked himself in the chain of our society. Couplet. What know men of the wearer, though they know the dress full well? The letter writer only can the letter's purport tell. Inasmuch as the state of dervishes is one of security, they had no suspicion of his meddling propensities and admitted him into companionship. Distichs. Rags are the external sign of holiness, sufficient, for men judge by outward dress. Strive to do well, and what thou pleasest wear. Thy head a crown, thine arm a flag may bear. Virtue lies not in sackcloth, coarse and sad. Be purely pious, and in satin clad. True holiness consists in quitting vice, the world and lust, not dress. Let this suffice. Let valiant men their breasts with iron plate. Weapons of war ill suit the effeminate. In short, one day we had journeyed till dusk and slept for the night under a castle's walls. The graceless thief took up the water-pot of one of his comrades, saying that he was going for a necessary purpose, and went in truth to plunder. Couplet. He'd fain with tattered garment for a dervish pass, and makes the Kaba's pall the housings of an ass. As soon as he had got out of the sight of the dervishes, he scaled a bastion and stole a casket. Before the day dawned, that dark-hearted one had got to a considerable distance, and his innocent companions were still asleep. In the morning they carried them all to the fortress and imprisoned them. From that day we have abjured society, and kept to the path of retirement, for in solitude there is safety. Stanza. When but one member of a tribe has done a foolish act, all bear alike disgrace. Seest thou how in the mead one ox alone will lead astray the whole herd of a place? I said, I thank God, may he be honoured and glorified, that I have not remained excluded from the beneficial influences of the dervishes, although I have been deprived of their society, and I have derived profit from this story, and this advice will be useful to such as I am through the whole of life. Distichs. Be there but one rough person in their train, for his misdeeds the wise will suffer pain. Should you a cistern with rosewater fill, a dog dropped in it would defile it still. Story. A religious recluse became the guest of a king. When they sat down to their meals, he ate less than his wont, and when they rose up to pray, he prayed longer than he was accustomed to, that they might have a greater opinion of his piety. Couplet. O Arab, much I fear thou at Mecca's shrine wilt never be, for the road thou art going is the road to Tartary. When he returned to his own abode, he ordered the cloth to be laid that they might eat. He had a son possessed of a ready wit, who said, O my father, didst thou eat nothing at the entertainment of the Sultan? He replied, I ate nothing in their sight to serve a purpose. The son rejoined, Repeat thy prayers again, and make up for their omission, since thou hast done nothing that can serve any purpose. Stanza. Thy merits in thy palm thou dost display, thy faults beneath thy arm from sight withhold. What wilt thou purchase, vain one, in that day, the day of anguish, with thy feigned gold? Story. I remember that in the time of my childhood I was devout, and in the habit of keeping vigils, and eager to practise mortification and austerities. One night I sat up in attendance on my father, and did not close my eyes the whole night, and held the precious Koran in my lap while the people around me slept. I said to my father, Not one of these lifts up his head to perform a prayer. They are so profoundly asleep that you would say they were dead. He replied, Life of thy father, it were better if thou too wert asleep, rather than thou shouldst be backbiting people. Stanza. Naught but themselves can vain pretenders mark, for conceit's curtain intercepts their view. Did God illume that which in them is dark, naught than themselves would wear a darker hue. Story. In a certain assembly they were extolling a person of eminence, and going to an extreme in praising his excellent qualities. He raised his head and said, I am that which I know myself to be. Couplet. Thou who wouldst sum my virtues up, enough thou find in outward semblance, to my secret failings blind. Stanza. My person in men's eyes is fair to view, but for my inward faults shame bows my head. The peacock, lauded for his brilliant hue, is by his ugly feet discomfited. Story. They asked Luqman, Of whom didst thou learn manners? He replied, From the unmannerly. Whatever I saw them do which I disapproved of, that I abstained from doing. Stanza. Not e'en in jest a playful word is said, but to the wise 'twill prove a fruitful theme. To fools 100 chapters may be read of grave import, to them they'll jesting seem. Story. They asked one of the sheikhs of Damascus, What is the true state of Sufism? He replied, Formerly they were a sect outwardly disturbed but inwardly collected, and at this day they are a tribe outwardly collected and inwardly disturbed. Stanza. While ever roams from place to place thy heart, no peacefulness in solitude thou'lt see. Hast thou estates, wealth, rank, the trader's mart? Be thy heart God's, this solitude may be. End of Part 1 of Gulistan, or Rose Garden.